6 years ago, a kindergarten student on the autism spectrum was voted out of class. Could something like that happen again with more attention on those on the autism spectrum? What about the changes in attitudes over the years? Good evening and welcome to our Impact 5 special on autism, Connecting the Pieces. During the next half hour, we'll look at attitudes about autism, what's changed, what changes might we see over the next decade, what do we need to see? We'll also be talking about the cost of autism. There's the emotional one, but a huge financial one as well. A recent study estimates the cost of raising a child on the spectrum can in some cases reach $2 million. We'll begin, though, with a look at the changing views about autism from the perspective of a mom and her son who was once forced from his kindergarten classroom. 11-year-old Alex Barton is like most other kids his age. He enjoys playing video games. You might remember Alex. When he was 5 years old, he and his mom, Melissa, were in the headlines.
It was horrific.
In 2008, when Alex was in a St. Lucie County kindergarten, he was sent to the principal's office for disrupting the classroom. When he returned, his teacher told the other kindergartners to vote on whether he should stay. They voted him out of class.
I felt a learning opportunity just to show all my students that there are consequences.
The teacher, Wendy Portillo, was suspended without pay for a year in a case that outraged many.
I still am astonished that the reaction was so widespread. It was an international story for a long time.
Alex was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, a high-functioning form of autism, during the entire ordeal.
I remember a little bit.
Today, he's in 6th grade at a regular school making the honor roll. He wants to be a lawyer when he grows up, and he's already looking forward to taking courtroom classes.
I'm pretty excited about that.
The experience has resulted in a change for his mom, Melissa, as well. She is now the director of the local chapter of Autism Speaks.
It did develop something in me. It developed a passion to really step up and be more than just a mother of a child diagnosed with autism, but to be an advocate.
And in retrospect, she says what happened to her son at school that day brought her to where she is today.
It definitely taught me a lot as a parent, as a person, about humanity, about people, about the system, politics. So I learned a lot.
A long journey, a long odyssey. Joining me now, the mom you saw in that story, Melissa Barton, and Terry Neal, president of the Autism Society of Palm Beach and Martin County. She's the mom of the now 12-year-old daughter on the autism spectrum. We thank you both very much for coming in and being our guest on this special edition of our broadcast. Talk first as a mom and somebody who, as I said, seen that arc, that journey, about the emotions you remember then, but the changes that perhaps we've seen for the good, and in some cases perhaps that we still need to see 10 years on.
Yeah. Wow, going back all those years is quite something. You know, Alex was so little and I was young too and didn't know anything about autism or rights or discrimination, had no idea. But I sure have learned a lot, and I think that our community has too. With cases, not just like Alex, but there are other cases as well where positive things have come from the communities that we live in. And I think that those changes have made quite a bit of difference for the children that we serve.
Terry, weigh in. Daughter, you've had the experience as well. Everybody I know with a loved one on the spectrum, and that includes my family as well, my sister and my nephews on the spectrum, have said at one point or another they'll have felt in a social setting or somewhere else that moment, or perhaps in your case a more protracted incident, of being misunderstood, shunned, looked at in a funny way at times. Talk about your perspective, what you've seen happen, and how you think things have evolved, if indeed you think they have.
I think from a mother of a daughter, I think it's a little different because the stereotypical autistic child is a boy. And it is very unusual sometimes to find young ladies on the spectrum, especially ones that are gifted, which my daughter is both. And so she has a hard time in the community, I'll be honest, because she doesn't really fit in anywhere. She tries to...
In what sense, for those that we're trying to educate?
In the school setting, in the gifted program. She is gifted, that is her primary exceptionality, but she doesn't seem to fit in there because the kids make fun of her because she's different. And if she's in an autistic class with nothing but other kids like her
on the spectrum,
she feels that don't relate to her. She can't relate to them. They're disruptive. They can be loud sometimes, and they can make gestures and noises that disrupt her, and she can't focus.
A little girl in one world trying to bridge to another.
Right, and she doesn't seem to bridge the gap between why the kids are making fun of her. And as far as you say, is it getting any better? I think as long as, I mean, middle school is a challenge regardless if you're on the spectrum or not. But I think as long as the children still make fun and bully, and you know, the schools are really working hard to not bully, but just smart little remarks, the way they stare at our children, they take things so differently. Their sensitivity to so many little issues is so heightened compared to other kids. So I think that until the kids and the parents of these children and the school teachers and the community as a whole realize these kids are just different. They learn differently. They're not freaks, and they're not weirdos, or they're not quirky or eccentric as they're always called. They're just uniquely different kids with a different way of learning and living and experiencing life.
And so many of these students are students who are in what we'll call mainstream schools. And I only mean by that that there's some schools that are specifically only for children on the spectrum. And so giving the point you just made, we need to have that inclusivity so that people understand, as you said, there are people on the autism spectrum. We all learn differently. From your official positions, let's go there just a minute. You've had the personal pain and emotion that very much comes out as I talk to you, but what is your sense in terms of where policymakers from education to Tallahassee are changing so that we as a society pay more attention to this and what we need to do about it?
Well, Michael, I don't think they have a choice. 1 in 42 boys are being diagnosed with autism. Really, are they going to be blind to what they're going through? Our entire world is facing an autism crisis.
But how are we seeing that change attitudes, laws, and the approach to what we do with and deal with this huge developmental disorder, the fastest growing one in the U.S.?
Well, Autism Speaks specifically, we have different individuals who speak to our government constantly. Oh my gosh. Oh, sorry, I have to edit that out. Lobbyists who work with our government constantly changing the laws. We've actually have 34 states who now cover health insurance benefits for autistic people. The military is now recognizing autistic children, whereas before they didn't. You may know that. So there is progress. It's slow, but it's still progress.
What do we need to do from your official perspective? We begin to talk more and more about what we need to do in terms of education, recognition, especially not only in the pre-kindergarten, early school, middle school, and high school, but beyond that. One of the great things I hear from people is all of these young kids, what about when they're adults? Are we making any real progress about what happens for that long life ahead for those on the autism spectrum? And if so, how? And what are the things we must focus on that we're not doing enough of?
And unfortunately, my answer is a bleak one, no. You know, the kids do grow up, and these kids, I still call them kids, the kids that started the awareness, 10, 20 years ago are now, in their 20s. 70% of all autistic adults are unemployed or underemployed, meaning they don't get the jobs they really could do. And so I think the key is we've got to educate the businesses, the corporate world, to get these kids in there so they can interview for jobs, because they're amazing. I mean, yes, we know that they work in industries where they can do the same repetitive activity over and over, but there's so many wonderful kids out there that can do more than that, that deserve a better chance, that could be greeters at Walmart, or that can sit in the back room and put tags on clothing over and over, and I guarantee you they'll be the best person in the world putting those tags on the clothing. So I think that is the key that we all have to focus on right now, is getting these kids, as the saying all goes, they graduate to the couch.
Yeah.
And they stay with mom and dad. And mom and dad also have to push them a little.
Yeah.
Get them out there. Sometimes the parents are just as guilty
Yeah.
as society because they don't think their kid can make it. And we've got, as the society, that is our #1 goal for the future, for next year and moving forward, is to try to help employ these people, educate the population out there that they are employable and they need jobs. And we want to help them get into schools where they can get a good education as well.
And we're seeing that sporadically. We've done stories over the past year, or the course of this past year, about that. But you're saying we need a bigger push, both from a community ground-up point of view, but also anything we can do as lawmakers to break down those barriers. I want to go back to, again, what do you feel out of Tallahassee? And again, many say, as you did, has to be bottom up. But what do you see from lawmakers, and let's break it down, proactively that's changed in 10 years in terms of at least beginning to try to address this? And then I want to touch again on the things that you're saying. If you were sitting there right now, you'd say, you got to do X, Y, Z.
Well, I can tell you, the first thing I can say here for our state is tenure has now been eliminated. And that, in Alex's case specifically, was very important. And, you know, you can't allow people to continue to abuse those with disabilities or otherwise. So you have to eliminate that in the public school district, which has been done, which is great. Another thing is healthcare is getting better. It's not great, but it's much better than it was 10 years ago. And I'm speaking from experience, coming out of pocket over and over again. So those are all positive. The negative is the post-secondary. I totally agree with that. We are missing out on what's next. What's next for Alex? I have no idea. He wants to be a lawyer, and I believe that he can do it, but society has to be right there with him. You know, education has to be right there with him, and not just the school he's in, beyond high school. So how do I get him there?
And I also had a mother recently tell me very poignantly, said, Michael, with all due respect, you've looked at children this year, then we were politely reminded, as we grew in our own understanding of this, that they're not going to be little kids forever. So we rightly began to put our focus on middle and high schoolers and young adults. And a mom said to me not long ago, said, but one of the things that we're not talking about enough is not everybody even has the chance to go be a lawyer. Not everybody is your daughter, that for all her problems that break anyone's heart to hear about the social issues, she's exceptionally gifted mentally with wonderful opportunities, at least that way. This mom said, Michael, what are we going to do for people like my little boy who's always going to be low functioning? And what answers can we give those moms and dads? Because that's the reality for a lot of people. And they say, in fairness, we're not doing a good enough job focusing on that part of it. And I see you shaking your head in agreement.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we have to do as a community here locally is we need housing. Housing is the #1 problem. And it becomes a problem
Your
because...
vision for what kind of housing?
Oh gosh, you know, I'd love to see, my personal opinion, I'd love to see a development of a center or a facility who would actually guide these children into post-secondary and then adulthood and keep them there as adults. Those who aren't able to function in society as a typical level, that would be a place for them permanently. And there is cost associated with it, but there's cost with autism. There is going to be. The state has to pick up some of that tab.
Terry, I see you shaking your head about the housing. I've heard about this.
Absolutely.
Expand on that.
And you can look at other states. They're replicated in many other communities. Virginia, North Carolina, there are many homes. And I don't want to really call them a group home because I think they go a little bit further than that, because there's a big negative connotation for that language down here in South Florida, especially with all the homes that are down here for different disabilities and different situations. But I really do think that if the state of Florida can look at other states and learn about what other states are doing successfully, we're very behind.
Yes.
Florida is very behind
Very
in the
much
rest
so.
of the world.
Give us an example of a state that you think's very ahead.
West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina. I don't know if it's because they're closer to DC where they can lobby, but a lot of the original founders of Autism Society and the people that really make the noise, that's where they live.
And at the end of the day, I hear this from so many people. I'm mindful of a program out of JARC, a wonderful group out of Boca Raton, who in some ways are modeling what you're talking about. And again, but that's through a lot of donations, a lot of effort. And they and I have talked a lot, and I say we need more of that from the private side, the private-public partnership. So if there's one thing you could see, it's the kind of opportunities that will create that nexus, that ability for somewhat of a centralized ability for housing, learning, and you think that's a must as we move forward.
It has to be. I mean, it has to be overall. And even if you do not have a child with autism or know a child with autism, this is going to affect you financially, period.
And speak to that, because people say I can feel for people who are raising children and adults on the spectrum. I can feel for adults who have young adults who will always live with them, but it's not my problem.
But it is, because it's your tax dollars. At the end of the day, the system has to pick up the tab. We have to. Parents cannot continuously pay for children forever. You know how expensive it is to have a child with autism? Well, you know, Michael.
Right.
So you can't expect families to be able to pick up those tabs. It's just not possible.
And this will be a good jumping off point to our next segment, which will be about those financial costs. But what progress have we made, which I know has been forward a bit, back a bit? Where do we stand now in your mind? Where do we still need to go there in terms of that issue about insurability?
While Medicaid has certainly helped, unfortunately, especially in Florida, it takes sometimes up to 7 years to get services and to get Medicaid that will pay for a lot of the support and the medical expenses that we have as parents on the spectrum. So that's frustrating. 7 years to get a med waiver. I mean, it's ridiculous. In 7 years, my child is going to be already out of the, serviced out of the community.
Yeah.
For all of the contentiousness about the Affordable Care Act, and we could have that debate all day and night. it's not helping right now?
No,
At least
not at all.
initially?
Not at all.
Bottom line, we're going to segue into insurance. A brief 10 or 15-second comment for you. Just a lot of people look at all of you and say, wow, what courage and guts and grit. What keeps you going every day? Final thought from you, and then from you, Terry.
My son keeps me going every
Yeah.
day. Absolutely. It's him and children like
It's
him.
that maternal love and paternal that we
Yeah.
see so much.
Yeah, you need
But you all
a
are special
voice.
parents. I mean, you really are. No, come on. All of you are.
And for me, I think it's my faith in God. If I didn't have him holding me up, I wouldn't get through this. I mean, I love my daughter, and you're right. She will have a bright future. It's just getting through, as everyone tells me, the next 5 years are going to be the challenge. And if I didn't have a strong support system through the Lord, I wouldn't make it. My family isn't here. I'm really doing this by myself. And that's what really gets me through every day.
And I know when the bell rings for anybody in the autism community, people like you come running to help. So there is that network of support, which is beautiful to
Absolutely.
see. I think all of you are remarkable angels as parents and
Thank
are
you.
special, special folks. So we know we're only ever scratching the surface with this, but if we can get people to think about it and this, taking away the stigmatization, doing more to look at the kind of things we need to do ground up and from Tallahassee, maybe we're making a little dent. And that's all because of you, and I thank you both for being with us.
Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing for us,
Well,
too.
we're honored to do it. Much more to come. We appreciate all the insight, and coming up, the rising cost of raising children on the autism spectrum. We hear much about the emotional toll, the challenges of raising a child on the autism spectrum, but there is also the financial toll contributing to all of that as well. One recent study found the cost of raising a child on the autism spectrum can be $1.4 million. And in cases where the child has autism in addition to another disability, the cost can rise in some cases to $2.4 million. Now, those costs are on top of the average cost of $241,000 to raise a child on 0 to 18 years of age, someone who's not on the autism spectrum. So, joining me to talk about the cost are Denise Negron Hernandez and her husband Felix. She works for Autism Speaks. He has his own fitness company. Thank you. First of all, tell us about your family and your circumstance.
Well, I have a son, Alejandro, who was diagnosed when he was 3 years old. And we, since God, were able to accept the diagnosis, and because this is something many families struggle with, and we start therapies with him, and thanks to that, he's doing amazing today.
But the insurance part of that, Felix, has been a difficult piece of it, and I hear this from everybody with a loved one, with a child on the autism spectrum. Talk about the difficulties early on, how things have changed for the better, how they need to change still in terms of the insurability of a son or a daughter on the spectrum.
Well, around 11 years ago when our son was diagnosed, the place where we went for therapies and gave us a diagnosis, they told us that they could help him. We didn't know what we were facing at the time, but they did say that they could help him. So when I asked what can they do for him, they said we need him here 40 hours a week. I said, fabulous, no problem. What insurance company does cover that? And they said none. So I said, well, how much is this out of pocket? They said $3,500 a month. That was 11 years ago. So
Did you come up with that?
no, we definitely could not.
No,
So
as most could not.
on top of the emotional distress, there was also a financial distress at the moment where we felt that not only our son was being now discriminated by the insurance companies because it was constantly said that it was a pre-existing condition. So we decided to be able to try and fulfill his needs as much as we could financially by hiring private therapists. And we were supplying or getting therapy between 8 to 10 hours a week for him.
What financial sacrifices did you have to make in terms of things that you all had to look at each other as husband and wife, say, we're going to have to do this?
Well, for a good portion of the time, we were able to finance his therapies through all of our savings, as well as their college education fund,
But
as
you
well
burned,
as
but you burned through that.
sure, as well as our families helping out.
What happened
And
then?
at that point, where we got to where the economy went bad, we had to make a decision to short sell our home in order to continue to be able to cover for his therapies, because it was either therapies or paying our property.
And Denise, as we stand here in 2014, the recession's over, but the financial difficulties are not. Where are you today financially?
Well, we are starting all over again,
Sure.
and thanks God, we're doing okay. I think we have to focus on his well-being, and we keep he's continuing with the therapies today. Thanks God, the therapies are covered today.
You're very courageous parents to do that.
Yes.
And you, with the love of family and with tough decisions, you had to make very tough decisions, made those choices. Some people don't even have that ability to make those choices. I'd like to ask you, what is your sense from a personal family perspective of how the insurance landscape has changed since the first diagnosis? In what ways do you think in Florida it's changed for the better, if at all, and where do we still need to go?
Well, as far as Florida is concerned, it's one of the states that have passed the legislation where now a certain amount of insurance company or carriers are now forced or mandated by the state
There's
to
a recognition
cover.
that they're made to have of autism.
Absolutely. So we have we have had a step forward. We certainly need a lot more. Still, there's a lot of families that cannot get coverage for their children.
And I want to go to that point in just a moment. What are things that weren't covered before for you that are now? What are things you're still fighting to have covered that they still will not budge?
Well, because of our particular health insurance carrier, we're getting the applied behavior analysis therapies covered for him,
Which I know can be a tough one to get. It's a constant battle.
Initially, we never got that
Sure.
one. So at least we feel that we're blessed as far as that's concerned, but not everybody has that blessing. Not everybody has their same insurance coverage.
What's your best advice on taking that fight to Tallahassee lawmakers? When you talk to people who, I know many are going to sit here and say, boy, I know their exact circumstance. What's the best way to fight that and to continue to get attention as the autism community say we need to make changes here?
Well, as far as the insurance reform, I believe, took place in 2009 in the
Yep.
state, and that's been enormous. We still need to get to federal level, and the reason why is because ERISA, there's a certain amount of insurance companies.
ERISA?
Yes, that actually are federally mandated, not state mandated. And they have the opportunity to sit back and not provide the coverage that the children need. So as far as states concerned, I don't know that there is much else outside of federally that needs to be done and changed.
But this is something that impacts people in so many different ways. From a mom's perspective, I was so touched by what you said, which essentially was we're going to make whatever sacrifice we had to make for our son. If I may ask, that can put an enormous strain on you all as a couple, certainly financially. What keeps you two going?
God.
Yeah.
We have a lot of faith. I think when you have God first place in your life, everything is possible. You just have to do the best you can, do as many sacrifices as you can for your children. I think they deserve a better future. If we don't do it, who's going to like?
Your son and daughter are sitting off camera, and there's a beautiful picture. I don't know if you'd mind if they come over. What a beautiful family. If they'd like to, they're welcome to come over here on camera if they'd like with us.
Come on.
I think the challenge, though, is as an autism community, though, Felix, as a proud mom brings the kids over, is to still keep working, keep pushing, keep trying to knock back those barriers. We've made a dent, but there has to be much more in terms of the uniformity of insurance coverage, the availability of it for people who, as tough as your circumstance has been, may not even have that. Now we have Gabriella here. Just talk loudly. She doesn't have a mic. How old are you, Gabriella?
I'm 10 years old.
Very excited. She's going to be in 5th grade next year. And
Alejandro.
Alejandro, who is now
8th grade.
8th grade.
You want to say hi?
These are the faces of a beautiful family, everybody. Alejandro, say hi to everybody. But you all are a beautiful, beautiful family.
you.
But the point is, as we have this beautiful family gathered, is that Alejandro's headed off to the anchor desk there. He's already, I think he's taking my job. And let me ask you, at the end of the day, best advice to people, both from an emotional and financial point of view, about how to continue the fight and to continue the push to make sure that the kind of coverage that is needed for this huge developmental disorder is something that we can push for. What's the best advice you give to people who are searching and struggling out there?
Well, the issue becomes, and it comes back to something that Denise just said, is faith. And our faith has taught us that we cannot focus on how big our challenge is, because it's huge. When you see those numbers, they're extremely impressive. We have to focus more on how big our faith is and how much we can actually do for our son. In everybody else's case, it becomes a little bit different because everybody else has a different type of coverage.
Exactly. And with that, we will wrap up the interview, except to say what a pleasure to meet all of you, and to meet Alejandro, and to meet our soon-to-be 5th grader. Very excited, huh? We appreciate it, putting real faces of courageous people, a great mom and dad who I've come to know over the last year in our coverage, and we'll continue to keep pushing lawmakers for answers too. That's part of what our job must be, to continue doing that. But we greatly appreciate you being here as the push goes on to recognize that this developmental disorder's with us to stay, and we must deal with it. Thanks for sharing your story, and we'll be back in a moment.
Thank you.
I want to thank my guests this evening for sharing their stories, putting the spotlight yet again on the autism spectrum. You can see more of our stories on WPTV.com. Click on the Impact 5 link. As always, thank you for spending time with us. We appreciate it. Enjoy your day.